I was once told when you present you should never start with an apology, but I apologise. Slightly delayed start this morning for obvious reasons. Obviously, very keen to get the Cabinet Secretary on stage. Before we start, I'm out of breath running up the stairs. Goodness me, must be getting old. Anyway, good morning everyone. Welcome to the conference, day 2. Absolutely fantastic to see so many people here today. With great crowd yesterday as well. A fantastic day yesterday. I'm sure all those that were here will agree with that. But again, today, day 2, another fantastic lineup of speakers and workshops, etc. So hopefully it will be as good, if not better, than yesterday. So my job, I'm not going to make a speech. I did that yesterday. For those of you who missed it, I'm going to introduce Linda, who's going to say a bit more of a welcome. But my job is really just to make sure everybody is safe in terms of emergency procedures, the usual housekeeping rules. So the emergency procedure is, allegedly there will be a siren, but there'll also be a voice message indicating that there is an emergency situation. And if that comes, we should all make our way in an orderly fashion out various exits, and we could all assemble at the front of the hotel and await further instructions. That would be great. Mobiles, please. Good chance just to check your mobiles, please. Put them to silent or even switch them off. Presentations, all of the presentations will be available after the event. Everybody who's attended will be sent an email with a link so people can look at them again and download them. Tweeting, yes, that is allowed. Obviously, it's always try and do it secretly, perhaps. So, when you're standing up and you're seeing the whole of the front row tweeting, it can be a bit off-putting. But please tweet. I'm not sure if is it called a Twitter handle? I think it's ScottRes14. Hashtag ScottRes14. Refreshments, hopefully everybody's aware where the refreshments will be. They'll be in the same place at the coffee breaks and at the lunch break next door. Just before I hand over to Linda, obviously I'd really like to thank the sponsors. That's the key thing for me to really say that, this is a great event, all of you turning up and the speakers, but without the support of our sponsors, then a lot of this will not happen. So we'd really like to thank Viridor, the British Heart Foundation and ACE UK, and also AluPro, who particularly sponsored the local authority bursary package. So a great thanks to those sponsors. So anyway, without further ado, I'll hand over to Linda from CIWM to formally welcome you to the conference. Thank you.
Good morning all. Lovely to see so many faces back from yesterday, and welcome to those who have come for today's proceedings. Looking forward to today. Yesterday was fantastic, and we had some great debates and discussions, and looked at how waste management companies, resource management companies of today are tackling the challenges from Europe and on their own doorstep. And today then we're moving forward from that to look at what the challenges are moving forward and where we're all heading and where the vision is taking. A couple of notes from yesterday then. Somebody said to me this morning, the first speaker yesterday gave us the idea that entrepreneurship wasn't as great as we thought it might be in Scotland, and I think there were a few kind of concerned faces, including me yesterday. So I'd like to just quote Andrew Carnegie in saying who said that there is nothing more impressive than a Scotsman on the make. I think that's more where we are. Anyway, I'm not going to hold up things. You're not here to listen to me this morning. I'd like to hand over to Mr. Lockhead then. This is the 5th year he's been able to come in and speak to us at this conference, and we're delighted to have him back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Linda, and it's nice to be back here again, as I've just learnt for my 5th year. There's a reshuffle in a couple of weeks, so who knows? Been nice knowing you all. But it is nice being back for my 5th year, and it's great to see an expanding audience. Clearly a sign that this is a sector going from strength to strength, and there's more and more interest in some of the issues you're debating over the course of this conference than ever before. So that's a really healthy sign. So it's good to see so many faces in the audience today. And of course, it's been a really quiet year since I last met you. Not much has happened in Scotland. Although last time I was in this hotel, because I'm being ironic, of course, it was the Commonwealth Games. The last time I was actually in this hotel, this was the headquarters and the main hotel for the Commonwealth Games, and the hotel was full of all the heads of delegations, and the athletes, the leading athletes, were popping in and out of here, particularly those who are retired but coming back to support the Games, not so much those that should be at the Athletes' Village. So there's lots of interesting, famous people walking about this hotel, not nearly as famous as yourselves and not nearly as athletic and as fit as yourselves, looking out at this fantastic audience today, but it was the last time I was here, so it was some experience. So it has been a really exciting year since we did last meet, and a lot has happened in Scotland over 2014 with the Ryder Cup, the Commonwealth Games, of course, and the independence referendum. And Scotland seems very energised at the moment, and so many people now are engaged in some of the big issues facing our country's future. So hopefully that's reflected amongst yourselves, those of you who particularly live in Scotland, and it's been really, really heartening to see so many people across Scotland from all walks of life engaging in those debates about our country's future. Not just a constitutional future, but the whole debate over the referendum led to people thinking about all kinds of issues and now wanting to take part and be active in these debates going forward. So this participation we're experiencing across society is incredible. It seems to be building even more momentum that will happen during the referendum campaign. So that's relevant to today, and the reason why I'm mentioning that is because the future of environment, the big challenges facing our society, we're at the heart of that debate and continue to be at the heart of those debates, and how we treat and respect our natural resources in this country has also been part of that debate. What abilities we have, or what our vision is for the future in terms of Scotland's economy or natural environment, or the way we deploy our natural resources and safeguard them for future generations. That's all been at the heart of the debate. So that's why today is also quite timely, because we're talking about some of these big issues facing the future. And in terms of safeguarding our natural resources and protecting our environment, we now recognise we have a lot to do. We're doing a lot already, but we've got a lot more to do in terms of winning people's hearts and minds and changing behaviours. So that's what this is all about as well. And that job, of course, is getting bigger and bigger all the time, because here in Scotland we're debating our future, but also across the whole of the world, these similar debates are taking place. And when you remember, we've got an increasing global population heading towards 9 billion by 2050, which of course means there's going to be more demand than ever before for the resources which do drive our economy. And we recognise that there's somewhat 65 billion tonnes of raw materials entering the world's economy each and every year, and that's expected to grow to 82 billion tonnes entering our economy by 2020. So that's a huge pressure on the world's resources. And history does tell us that as pressures and resources get more intense, markets, of course, become more volatile and prices increase, and issues such as protectionism also grows. And we've all seen how there's been price fluctuations for metals, for food, for other agricultural products, and how these fluctuations have been more extreme in the first decade of this century than compared to any decade in the last century. So that uncertainty, that volatility does create risks for our economy, and it brings social and economic costs around the whole of the globe. And that's not really a future any of us really want to see. Yet the default approach worldwide is often to bury, burn or downcycle many of the world's precious commodities. For example, between now and 2020, I was told, and this is a fascinating fact, that we'll import about £50 million worth of gold into Scotland, which is hidden away in our TVs, our mobile phones and our computers, but we're going to recover just a tiny fraction of that. And how many people in Scotland are aware that we import £50 million worth of gold in the devices we use in our everyday lives, but yet we're only going to recover a fraction of that, as I say. And situations like that do seem absolutely absurd, and we, I think, all recognise in this room there has to be another way of doing things. So I am proud that here in Scotland we are committed to doing things differently. We hear the message about Scotland's forward thinking coming back to us all the time from the likes of CIWM. And just recently with the Ethical Corporation, the Green Alliance have also highlighted the many ways that our approach here in Scotland is more ambitious and proactive for perhaps even the rest of the UK. And we've also had that feedback from our membership of the Circular Economy 100 network. And these messages are often conveyed back via Zero Waste Scotland. So it's really important in Scotland we do have our own voice in the sustainability field, particularly with moves towards becoming a more circular economy in the future. So all the support we're receiving in Scotland for what we're doing is very warmly welcomed. But warm words won't get us very far unless we back them up with action and initiate real progress on the grounds. We've already made good progress in many areas, but there are also areas where we need to up our game, and in quite radical ways. At this event last year, I launched a resource efficiency programme called Safeguarding Scotland's Resources. We have made great strides in implementing that policy and that document, neatly summarised, of course, in the Zero Waste Scotland's Towards Zero magazine, which you're getting a copy of here today. And one of our big actions was, to legislate for the 5p minimum charge on all single-use carrier bags, which flowed from safeguarding our natural resources. And of course, that just came into force in Scotland last week. And we want to reduce the number of bags in use in Scotland. We want to cure Scotland of its carrier bag addiction and reduce the amount of bags that end up as litter in our beautiful country. And I'm delighted that the whole of the retail sector is united behind Zero Waste Scotland's carrier bag commitment. And we've got already 160 big companies that have registered for that so far. And we have to make sure that all the proceeds from the charge go to the good causes. Of course, at the same time, we're also implementing actions from Scotland's Zero Waste Plan. A major milestone for that work was the introduction in January of our groundbreaking waste regulations. The regulations were introduced to drive up both the quantity and quality of recycling in Scotland towards our long-term target of 70% recycling of all waste by 2025. And already they're making a massive difference. We just have to look at food waste, for instance. There are now 1.3 million households that have access to food waste recycling services, and for example, the many thousands of visitors also to big events such as the Commonwealth Games and the Ryder Cup were able to recycle their food waste at the venues that were being used. And all of that is unprecedented. Only a few short years ago, there were very few homes in Scotland getting access to these kinds of services, and now there's 1.3 million, so we're moving ahead at quite a reasonable pace. We also have to harness all these resources, such as food waste, for industries elsewhere in Scotland, such as renewable energy and fertiliser, so there's win-wins here to be captured for Scotland. And high-quality recycling supports economic growth, it fosters innovation, and it boosts employment and helps secure access to critical resources, which, as I've said before, potentially will become scarcer and scarcer in the decades ahead. So we do have to set our stall to be an ambitious recycling nation, but our progress must now reflect our level of ambition. Last month, the household recycling figures for 2013 were published. They showed a continuing increase in recycling, which is of course welcome, especially in the context of an overall reduction in waste, which again is good news. And I was also heartened that some of our best performing councils are now pushing above 60% recycling. But we can't hide from the fact that a 42% national rate is pretty disappointing, and therefore we have to be determined to up our game on recycling. As many of you will know, earlier this year, to help achieve that, John Swinney, the Finance Secretary, and myself commissioned a Zero Waste Task Force working closely with COSLA, and that's a joint task force with local government through COSLA. So we're now engaged in that constructive dialogue about how we can refocus our efforts to get the higher quality recycling we want for Scotland's economy, and our next meeting of that task force is scheduled for the next couple of weeks. I really, really hope that the task force will lead to an agreed set of recommendations with our local authorities, all 32 of them, that will deliver for Scotland. But to be absolutely clear, I am not taking any measures off the table, statutory or otherwise, if there's going to be any risk to our ambitions. So we all have to work together, we absolutely have to, otherwise we'll be forced to look at alternative measures, and I won't shy away from doing that. The task force has considered the barriers to investing in high quality recycling. It is clear that our fragmented approach that we do have at the moment to collecting materials does make things very, very hard for potential investors. So that's obviously a key challenge for the task force. For example, we believe that Scotland could support a commercial plastics reprocessing factory, recycling tens of thousands of tonnes per year, and with the potential, of course, to create dozens of new jobs at the same time. But such a facility would currently need supply contracts for most of Scotland's 32 councils to be viable. So we have to make that task easier by creating that one-stop shop for delivering priority materials to the marketplace, otherwise it simply won't happen. And so, as an emerging priority for the task force, I am pleased to say today that we are now going to introduce a Scottish materials brokerage service. And that will enable Scotland's local authorities to put contracts in place that will bring together high-quality recycled material from collection systems across the whole of Scotland and then into reliable supply chains for reprocessors. And likewise, it will also enable us to make strategic decisions about how we deploy these resources in our economy. So that new service that we're going to introduce is forward-thinking. It's hopefully going to address some of these big challenges I've just mentioned. It will combine Zero Waste Scotland's market intelligence with the collaborative expertise of Scottish procurement at the same time. And that service now will get underway in January 2015. And other resources like energy or water are so important to our economy that we do not leave their supply to chance. We manage strategic national infrastructure to ensure their secure, consistent and high-quality supply. So we do agree that likewise material resources are also vital for our economy, and it stands to reason that we should also take a much more strategic view of how they are managed as well, so again that we all benefit. So the materials brokerage service we're introducing, combined with the waste regulations I've mentioned as well, could be seen as the first steps towards creating a materials infrastructure for Scotland. And that will be central, critical in terms of being part of the resources landscape. And it will mean we can get high quality materials like plastics, metals and waste electricals into the hands of the innovative businesses that are now growing in this country to give them a new life. So initiatives like the brokerage service are important to delivering our zero waste agenda in this country, and we're also committed to these goals for the long term. But it's also right that we look ahead to what our next priorities should be. Right now, we're looking at how we can support the deep innovation needed to shift to a more circular economy in this country. Like many of you, I certainly believe the case for a circular economy is irresistible. Continuing in our current sort of linear path is not an option that we're prepared to accept. But we also need to be really clear about what we mean. A circular economy is not simply a rebranding exercise for waste management. A more circular economy will be achieved through radical changes in how we design and make and use products and services. So it's not just about evolution, it's about revolution. But the changes we are making today in waste and resource management, I do believe, can support and enable that shift in thinking. That's why we welcome the ambitious approach reflected in the proposals brought forward by the former European Commissioner for the Environment, Commissioner Potczek, to move European policy along the journey from zero waste to a circular economy. So others in Europe are looking to Scotland as a source of inspiration in this particular agenda, and I'm determined that our voice in Scotland is heard in these European negotiations and discussions. And like others, we are seeking clarifications and aspects of the Commission's circular economy package, which they're speaking about, to ensure we get the right set of measures for Scotland, given our distinctive needs and characteristics. But unlike the UK government, we will be voicing strong support for the overall direction of the package. And indeed, in our submission to the Smith Commission on Further Devolution for Scotland, which is in the news just now, the Scottish Government called for the right to engage directly with EU institutions and decision-making in areas of devolved competence. I'm not willing to have Scotland's ambition and opportunity held in check by UK apathy on the zero waste agenda. So I do believe, you won't be surprised to hear, there is a compelling case for more powers for Scotland in this area of policy. And indeed, it was significant that John Swinney just unveiled the Scottish landfill tax as one of the first taxes to be collected in Scotland for more than 300 years in his budget just a couple of weeks ago. As a next step, control of the aggregates levy would complement our powers in landfill tax and enable us to further integrate waste and other environmental policies. And we do need other powers over other issues that affect this agenda directly. We don't have powers over product design, for instance. They're reserved for the UK government. We'd like to see them devolved to Scotland, and also even banning certain materials like polystyrene. We don't have powers to do that in Scotland. For some bizarre reason, that's also reserved for the UK government. So as you can see, in terms of the submission to the Smith Commission and the big debate that's taking place over extra devolved powers for Scotland, there are many, many issues that are very relevant to the subject of this conference and our ambitious goals in terms of this agenda. But in the meantime, we have to remain focused on using the powers we already have to good effect. In particular, we want to build on collaboration between our agencies to coordinate efforts on a circular economy. We're already working hand in hand with Zero Waste Scotland and SEPA and the enterprise agencies and local government and others. And again, it's my pleasure to announce something else today, which is one of the first fruits of that kind of collaborative approach. Because we've been looking at what we can do to stimulate more remanufacturing in Scotland. And as again, I'm sure you'll agree, remanufacturing is a fascinating area of policy. Presently in Scotland, we estimate there are around 60 companies active in this area across many different sectors. These regenerative businesses, literally turning the old into the new, are contributing hundreds of millions of pounds to Scotland's economy and, of course, creating high-skilled jobs as well, often in the more local communities. But it's something of a Cinderella sector, and that's despite global companies like Renault blazing a trail in this area. Their manufacturing plant near Paris employs more than 300 people, generates over £150 million a year, and produces gearboxes which use 80% less energy and create 75% less waste than those gearboxes for the cars made from new components. So with more profile and impetus in this country, we believe that remanufacturing can become a thriving part of a revitalised industrial base in this country. So to help give this sector the recognition and dedicated support it deserves, Zero Waste Scotland and the Scottish Funding Council are together providing £1.3 million investment in research and a knowledge hub. And that's going to be called the Scottish Institute of Remanufacturing, which will be based at the University of Strathclyde, not far from here where we meet today. And that will be an important long-term building block for our circular economy aspirations. So Scotland is going to benefit from a new Scottish Institute of Remanufacturing. And the Institute will be an industry-led centre of expertise, offering training and applied research to help companies move into remanufacturing for the first time, as well as help existing remanufacturers become more competitive. I know a number of Scottish companies have already pledged funding and in-kind support for the Institute's first projects, so I do commend the new Institute and look forward to hearing a lot more about its progress in the months and years ahead. The Institute builds on existing support, such as the £3.8 million Scottish Recycling Fund, run by Scottish Enterprise and Zero Waste Scotland, to support the development of reuse and remanufacturing capacity in Scotland. And the Institute will further enhance our international profile in the circular economy, building on the connections we're already making as a country as part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation CE 100 network. And I'm delighted, of course, that Sandy Roger from the Foundation is going to be telling us more about his work today. However, again, they're just the first steps. If we want to grasp the mantle of a circular economy, we need to stimulate much more focused activity in this area. We need to up the pace of change and bring a circular economy approach into mainstream thinking. That's why we do want to open up discussion on the opportunities of a circular economy for Scotland right across our society. I think we all agree that we're not going to get much further down this path whilst it remains something that's just spoken about in rooms like this and not by ordinary people in Scotland who can understand the benefits of creating a circular economy. So one of our big challenges is to try and move this debate from the obscure and conferences and rooms with experts and the most enthusiastic to becoming a more mainstream subject across Scottish society. So that's certainly a big challenge for us all in this room and for the government as well. And over the next 6 months, the Scottish Government and all our partners are going to undertake a major engagement initiative to get people thinking about the opportunities and challenges ahead in this agenda. And we'll do our best to secure a parliamentary debate as well, to get onto Parliament's agenda and give it more profile. And to kick that off and emphasising the need to get Civic Scotland engaged in these issues, we have asked the Green Alliance and the Scottish Council for Development Industry to develop some early thinking for us on this issue, which they will publish very soon. And we hope that work and other contributions that will follow will start to engage people in the kinds of opportunities and solutions that really will work best here in Scotland. And from this, and following the conclusions of the Zero Waste Task Force, we intend to develop a roadmap on the circular economy later next year. There will be opportunities for all of you, of course, to contribute to that process, and that clearly starting here at this conference this week, and I'll be very keen to hear the feedback and ideas about how we can move this big debate forward. So just to close, I believe we have a huge opportunity ahead of us, harnessing the energy we have here in Scotland today, using our existing powers effectively and making the case for more, creating national and international collaboration to help up our game and to bring everyone with us on what is a really important journey for our economy, for our natural environment and for our country's future. Working together, we can meet our zero waste goals, we can push on to an even more ambitious vision for our circular economy. It's very exciting, it's something relatively new, and I have no doubt that people of Scotland will get behind the whole concept of a circular economy, just as more and more they're getting behind the whole concept of living in a zero-waste society. So thank you to all of you for all your contribution to try and make that vision a reality, and please keep up the good work, and I hope you have a successful conference. Thank you.
Wow. Quite a lot in that. I can see smoke coming from some people's fingers as they were trying to tweet all the announcements that just happened in the last few minutes. Exciting stuff, very exciting stuff. And Mr. Luckham himself mentioned Ellen MacArthur Foundation and Sandy Roger. So without further ado, I'll get Sandy to come up here and continue this conversation today. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for leading us off in such inspiring start. We exist as a foundation to accelerate the transition to the circular economy. And if you've looked at some of the research that's been done, the reports that have been written on this over the last 3 years, you'll know that this is a huge economic opportunity. So something like $1 trillion available globally. So what is that? That's lower costs. It's less volatile costs, as the Minister told us. It's enterprise and innovation opportunities. It's employment opportunities. So it's a real, huge economic opportunity for the world. But it's hard. It's not an easy thing to access. And there are two particular things that face us at this stage in the process. One is that the circular economy is not a game of solitaire. You cannot play this game by yourself. It has to be done working with others. It is, at the end of the day, a change to a system. So a system is all about the interconnected parts. Individual companies can't do this by themselves. Individual local authorities can't. Even individual nations can't do this by themselves. So it's all about collaboration. The other thing that's hard is, like any change, you have to work your way up the experience curve and the scale curve. Those are the things that give you economies. And of course, the linear economy, which has been with us for 250 years, has done all of that. It has the scale, it has the experience, it's very efficient at what it does. And in introducing a circular economy, we're trying to compete with that. So at the start, it's hard, and then it gets easier, and the pendulum will swing in our favor. So at this stage, what do we need to get this moving? We need people who are willing to collaborate, and we need people who are skillful leaders, not just the courage and the bravery, but also the skill to spot the right opportunities to start with. And so the first thing I really want to say today to Cabinet Secretary, to Zero Waste Scotland, the Scottish Government, and to all of you is, we see Scotland playing that part. We see Scotland taking a lead. We see you collaborating. And it's really inspiring to see that. Speaking as the one Glaswegian in the Ellen MacArthur Foundation team, it's just great to come and see that opportunity and see you grasping it. So let's talk a bit this morning about some of the actions that are happening and give you a sense of the momentum that's building around this. Now, if any of you are adherents of circular economy literature, you'll probably have seen this chart before. It's come to be known as the butterfly chart, perhaps for obvious reasons. And you'll find it in any of the reports that are published about the circular economy. I'm not going to use this opportunity to try and explain in detail what it's about. That's something for an offline conversation over a cup of coffee if you're interested. But what this is a kind of 50,000-foot view of the economy, of the flows of materials through the economy. And on the left-hand side, in the green colour, you can see what we call the biological cycle. So this is materials that, after they're used, can become nutrients, literally for the next crop. And on the right-hand side of the chart in blue, you can see what we call the technical cycle. So that's materials like metals and plastics, which really don't belong in the natural environment, and they need to be used and reused repeatedly. And you can see all the multiple cycles representing different ways of doing that. So in essence, at a very high-level view, that's what the circular economy is. Now, the key thing to understand is that picture in front of you is really an enormous jigsaw. It breaks down into literally millions of pieces. And those pieces are all around us, even in this building here today. You know, the stall just outside there with a better bin is part of this story. The Zero Waste Task Force, working with local authorities to harmonise systems for collecting waste, that's part of the story. In the world where I used to work, people running factories who are redesigning packaging so that it can be accurately segregated, or are finding a way of selling something as a service instead of a product. These are all the little parts of the jigsaw. And the exciting thing about this is, whatever parts of this we can see today, there will be millions more in the years to come. This is so much about innovation, and it's so much about opportunities and things that we've perhaps not even thought of today that will make all of this happen. So we need to create an opportunity here. It's not about locking in today to a particular set of solutions. It's about opening the door to innovation. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that we are doing. Now, I'm probably, if I'm not maybe at the 50,000 feet view, I'm sort of at the 25,000 feet view. The guys developing the new bins are at the kind of feet on the ground view. At the end of the day, we need to make the whole jigsaw work together. But I'm going to talk about the kind of enabling things that we're doing, working with Zero Waste Scotland and indeed other organisations in Scotland. So I'm going to do that in three parts. Now, the Minister mentioned a couple of times this thing called the Circular Economy 100. So what is that? Well, it's a collaborative platform. You can see on the left-hand side there's 4 different kinds of organisations involved. I should explain in this company that when I say regions, I'm meaning nations as well as also cities. But you can see that we have businesses, large businesses, emerging innovators, they're often the smaller companies, universities. And you can see that we've got enough members in that the logos are becoming almost microscopic on the chart. I apologise for that, but if you look carefully, you can see a little Scottish flag there that represents the Scottish Government. We're actually one of the first members of the C100. You'll also see big companies that you're familiar with, IKEA are there, Philips, Renault, Unilever, across multiple sectors. You'll see smaller companies, perhaps names you're not familiar with. They're some of the innovators. So that's the community that we have brought together to drive innovation in the circular economy. And to give you an idea of some of the things that we do, first of all, there's an educational component to this. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation was set up at the start to do educational work. We work today with schools and universities, but we also work in executive education. And so we provide educational offerings for leaders in business and in government, and indeed that's an area of our work that we're expanding. We also have what we call acceleration workshops. Now, acceleration workshops are misleading, perhaps, because if you were parachuted into the room at an acceleration workshop, you might think you were in a conference. Right? There's people sit like this in a big room. There's people go off into smaller rooms. People stand and drink coffee and talk to each other. It looks very much like a conference, but it isn't the same. Because what we've got here is a continuing group of people. These people meet every 6 months. We have a series of groups, and you can see the themes down the right-hand side of the chart. We have a series of groups who are working into the different areas of the circular economy and increasingly are doing work together on these. And the project charters that I mentioned at the bottom are specific projects. We've got a group in one area looking at material specifications and standards for their industry. We have a group in another area who are creating visionary stories for the future in the consumer goods world to try and explain to people how retailers and consumers and so on might use the products and packaging in a different way. So there's all sorts of things really going on. This is a real collaborative community who are doing work together. And one of the hardest things running these events is actually to get people back into the room for the next session, because most of the work that's being done here is not even in the formal programme at all. It's the things that are happening just in conversation amongst the companies there. And Scotland have been part of this from the start and have been hugely proactive collaborators. We're also triggering some major studies around policy and environmental aspects of the circular economy, and I'll come to that at the end because that again has a direct relevance to Scotland. So that's the first area of action. The C100 is a place where the circular economy thinking is really developing. I'll move on now to something called Project Mainstream. Now, these images on the screen are the 3 circular economy reports that have been produced over the last 3 years. They've been produced by the Foundation together with McKinsey. We've done a lot of the analysis work and brought a lot of industry knowledge. And the third one, the red one there at the front, has been done also with the World Economic Forum. And the World Economic Forum run the annual Davos summit that you see every year in the news, the World Economic Forum simply have the best high-level network of government and business on the planet. And the reason that we're working with these people is there's a particular kind of breakthrough that we need to make the circular economy happen. And this breakthrough is in the area of what we call stalemates. So the Project Mainstream is the direct result of that third report, and it's a project which is about collaboration addressing major stalemates. Now, I'm going to illustrate that by talking about one of the projects that we're doing in a moment, but just bear with me for a minute while I give you the kind of overview of what we're doing. We've got 3 projects on the go. You can see them listed there. One is around plastic packaging. I'm going to talk about that one in a moment. The second one is about paper. The third one is about what we call asset tracking. So that's tagging products and components so that you can follow them through the value chain. You know what you've got, you know where it is, you know what it can be used for. And so we accurately segregate and reuse products and components. So these are the 3 projects we're working on, and we have a growing number of participant companies and cities. I was on a steering board call for the project yesterday. The number is now 37, and it's climbing daily. So we have a really strong participation on this. Now, okay, so what do I mean by a stalemate? So let me use the plastic project as an example. And this is one that may well be of interest in Scotland, and it certainly links to the work you're doing with your Zero Waste Task Force. So we're here in the world of consumer goods. Right? Imagine you're looking at the shelf in the supermarket, or you're looking at the fridge at home, and you're looking at the packaging, the plastic packaging. And there's 2 design decisions involved in this. So one is the design of the packaging itself. The other is the design of the system that catches the packaging after use, that collects, segregates, reprocesses that packaging. And the people who are involved in those designs, well, as you would expect, the designers of the packaging are often the branded FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods companies. It's Unilever, it's Procter & Gamble, Nestle, or indeed lots of smaller companies as well. They're working with their chemicals and their packaging suppliers. And they're working, of course, with the retailers. And then the retailers also enter into the second space. So the retailers are here in the community selling the product, which goes to the consumer or the citizen. And then it ends up in the thing that we used to call the waste stream, but now we think of it more and more as being about resources. So that's collecting, segregating, reprocessing the waste. And if we want to have a circular economy, the materials need to go round and round through these 2 systems. So it needs to flow through the consumer goods supply chain, it needs to flow through the city or municipal level system, and it needs to flow back again. And I think many of you would know in a very hands-on way that this doesn't altogether work today. The stuff that ends up in the municipal streams doesn't all end up as another item of packaging. Even PET, which people talk about as being the best recycled of the plastic materials, 93% of PET packaging made globally is made from virgin material. Only 7% has already been another pack before. And that's probably the best one. So this system is not working. And one of the reasons why it's not working as a whole is because nobody can make the first move to change it. If you are the biggest and best intentioned consumer goods company in the world, you come up with the perfect design for packaging which could be 100% recyclable. The trouble is there's no city in the world that is dealing only with your packaging, they're dealing with everybody else's packaging as well. So it's really difficult to get the segregation to work. Similarly, if you came up here in Scotland with the most fantastic recycling process, and you went to, let's say, Unilever and said, look, can you just change the design of your packaging to suit our fantastic system? They would have to say, look, the trouble is our factory isn't just making for you, it's making for the rest of Europe as well. They don't have the same system. So you have this stalemate, and what Mainstream is about is breaking those kind of stalemates with high-level collaboration. And so we've put together, and we're building as we speak, an amazing group of top cities and top companies who are committed to producing a common roadmap. So this is integrating the design of packaging with the design of waste systems, making commitments together to drive this forward. And that's an example of the kind of thing we're doing. We're doing this on plastic packaging, but there will be other examples to follow beyond the first 3 projects that I mentioned. So that's the second area of collaboration. That's about Project Mainstream. Now let me come finally to some of the things we're doing directly with Scotland, and the Cabinet Secretary has already mentioned some of these, but nevertheless let me emphasise. I think the first one, which is so important, is about fostering innovation and entrepreneurship. Linda, you said right at the start, the comment about the Scotsman on the make, we need lots of that, right? Let's not kid ourselves that all the best ideas already exist or that they will happen in the bigger organisations. They probably won't. They'll happen in smaller organisations. And so we need to foster that. We need to create a space in which those innovations are allowed to grow and develop and get the investment that they need. And so Zero Waste Scotland have set up a small and medium-sized enterprise network. The first meeting of that was last month. I think 9 companies were there. Biotechnology companies, engineering companies, companies doing clever things with waste and composting, energy companies, and members of our team came along to help with that workshop. And we're doing similar things with the other regions around the world where we operate. So that's really, really important to foster that entrepreneurship. The second thing, the Cabinet Secretary told you about the new Institute for Remanufacturing. What a fantastic idea. My background is in manufacturing, and I'm not an expert in remanufacturing, but I can see that it's the same but different. It requires different skills, in some ways a different orientation. It will require some technologies that perhaps don't exist today. So to build a remanufacturing capability, I don't want to be emotional about it, but it is an opportunity for a kind of rebirth of manufacturing in places like Scotland where we have a great tradition of manufacturing. Here's an opportunity to create a new manufacturing sector. What a fantastic opportunity that is. Then there's the other continuing things that we're doing, and who knows, at the next of our acceleration workshops, the Scotland people may come along and get in some project around electronic waste or whatever. There's lots of things going on, and we would encourage you just to be open and active contributors, and indeed with Project Mainstream as well, as I was describing before. There are numerous opportunities there. And then finally, the future prospects here. We are starting up 2 major studies. One is into policy, because the regulatory framework for the circular economy is a really important enabler. We have a regulatory framework around us today, which much of it was designed with the very best of intentions, but essentially it was designed for the linear economy, and it will need to change. And so we are starting a study using Denmark as a pilot region, but the idea is to create a toolkit for regulation in the circular economy, and the Scottish team are part of the group that are kind of steering that project. So we very much welcome your participation. We hope, Cabinet Secretary, that will help create a blueprint for doing this, so that each country and each region doesn't reinvent the wheel on this, but we actually have circular economy regulation that works in a fairly universal way. The final thing is about employment, and we're starting a study here about employment. I said that the circular economy creates jobs. It's easy to see kind of intuitively why that might be with all the remanufacturing and recycling and so on. But we need to look at this more thoroughly. We need to understand what the calibration of that is, what the scale of the opportunity, and also what are the skill requirements. If we want it to happen, there's probably things we need to do in developing skills in the educational system to make it possible. So we're going to be looking at that as well. So there's opportunities here for you to continue to be part of our network and to learn lessons working with other regions and big companies around the world that can be applied here in Scotland. So those are the 3 domains that I wanted to talk about, the actions that are going on. But let me kind of bring you back to the here and now, and really to the little pieces of the jigsaw. There is something going on right now called the Disruptive Innovation Festival. This is an online event. It runs for 4 weeks. This is the second of the 4 weeks, so there's still plenty of time to get involved. Hundreds of hours of really high quality content from all around the world. Videos, discussions, inputs from academics, from businesses, from innovators, from members of the public. Last time I checked, there were nearly 6,000 people participating in this. Go to thinkdiff.co, let me get that right, thinkdiff.co, and join in and see what's there. And if you want to get encouragement from the building of momentum in this area, I think a combination, Cabinet Secretary, of your speech and the DIF should get you there today. And thank you very much for your time, and I hope the rest of the conference goes really well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know as a waster, I'm not allowed to use that word anymore, as a waster, then I kind of look at the circular economy and think, okay, it's coming, but what's my part in that? Where do I sit? And there's a whole bunch of entrepreneurs in the room, and for some of us, the opportunities are here now to go and be remanufacturers or to diversify or to change our things. But for others, as resource and waste management companies, then it's important that we need to understand this stuff up the chain. If we're looking at where we head in the future and our business models, we need to understand fully how that remanufacturing, how that design process is changing so that we know what materials we're then looking to process and bring back into that chain on the thing. So it's all very relevant and it's fantastic stuff. To know that it's now, it's not medium to long term anymore, it's definitely now and short term stuff for us all. Fantastic. So it's time to open up to the floor and take some questions. You've heard an awful lot in the last hour. Hopefully you've all been scribbling questions down and remember everything that's said. We've also got Ian Gulland on the I didn't ask him if he was going to take questions, but I'll put him up here as well. With Mr. Lockhead and Sandy, if you'd like to ask some questions. Normal format, please put your hand up. We'll bring the mic to you and say who you are and where you come from. Thank you very much. Who would like to start us off? There can't be no questions. Over here.
Thanks. Charles Newman, Resource Media. Ian, Mr. Lockhead, congratulations on this materials brokerage. Presumably it will set a high quality spec for the material it takes. Where does that leave poor quality supplying local authorities? Are you going to be turning them away, or you're not going to be working with them, or where do they fit into the jigsaw?
Not for me.
I think so. That's why you're here.
Well, the obvious answer to that question is local authorities don't provide poor quality material, they provide good quality, but it is about driving up the quality, as the Cabinet Secretary said. So, yeah, it's part of the ongoing kind of project team to look at how we actually finesse it, I guess, to ensure that what we're trying to do is not just get a good price for what we've currently got, but how do we get a better price? And actually, unfortunately, it's not really about the price. It's about how do we get better quality material into a supply chain in Scotland and actually kickstart reprocessing here. So it is about looking across all of the local authorities that want to be involved in this to ensure that we're actually moving forward in terms of the quality. But yeah, I don't think it's about leaving people behind, if that's what you're suggesting. It's about trying to make sure that what we've got is a good product going forward, and we're going to get the best success for Scotland in terms of economic opportunities, in terms of jobs and reprocessing. So it's about making that connection with the market.
The only thing I would add is that clearly in these very tough financial times, local authorities are looking to get a good economic return, and therefore we can give an incentive to local authorities and work with them to show how it's in all our interests financially to supply the best quality, recycle it or whatever, then it's a win-win, and they'll realise actually it's about saving money and making money, and therefore it's in the interests of local government to supply the best quality materials.
Okay, thank you. Next question, please. We're never this quiet. Come on. Over here, Adrian.
Thank you. Adrian Bond from SEPA. I was delighted to hear Sandy mention regulation as being an enabler for the circular economy. We're working with the Scottish Government at the moment to redesign our environmental legislation and the regulation that comes from that. Are there any key points that you would give to us in terms of what we should be aiming, what our ambition should be about how that works?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer when we've just also started our study to kind of look at that. So perhaps we're in a way in the same place that we're starting into the work. And so I wouldn't give you a kind of concrete set of guidelines because we need to work through that. It's a complicated question, isn't it? I mean, I think the thing that is certainly guiding our work is the regulation that's there today is there for good reasons. It's there to protect consumers, it's there to protect businesses, it's there to protect people from getting ripped off in all sorts of very practical ways. And we need to think deeply about how you give people those same protections in this new world. You know, so if you consider something like the REACH regulations, where, you know, absolutely right that we try and take toxicity out of the materials that are existing in people's lives. But the trouble is, if you make something from virgin materials, you have a much, much more definitive view of what chemicals are in there than if you make it from recycled materials. So unintentionally, in the short term, the REACH regulations rather favour the linear economy, even if all of us would agree in the long term that you want to take that toxicity out of the system. So I think the answer is we've got to work through some of these things. Some of them are going to be transitional things to get out of the current system, because as the manufacturers begin, as I was saying with that roadmap, as manufacturers begin to make their products differently, that's also part of the story. It's not just about regulating to catch the same stuff and do a better job with it. It's also regulating for different stuff as well. And so I think we've got to work through that. But honestly, Adrian, the answer is we're working on the same stuff, and we should keep in touch is probably the real answer.
Good question. Next one from the floor, from the front here.
Hi, Maxine Perella. I'm a journalist. This question is directed to Sandy, really. How do you see traditional waste management companies evolving to take advantage of the circular economy model, not just recycling, but also the tighter loops where there are more values, such as remanufacture?
Well, I think in a way they become manufacturing businesses. You know, they become businesses with customers and suppliers in a way that, you know, people running factories have understood for many years, and it has a somewhat different dynamic to it than the waste industry as we've thought of it in the past. So, you know, understanding the markets where you're selling, understanding the competitors who, at least in the short term, will be the virgin producers, understanding what the customer wants. So, I mean, what does Unilever need for plastics? You know, if Unilever is going to make its packaging from 100% recycled material, what would be the specification of that, and how would they want it supplied? You know, so I think a big part of it is understanding those markets, and then I think the other thing is when I used to work in manufacturing, and you learned about quality, the thing that you always tried to do is have homogeneous raw materials. You know, as any manufacturer, you would try and push away to your supplier the challenge of making sure the material was exactly in spec. And the challenge for this economy is you don't really have that option. You have to deal with what's coming in. So there's a much, much more subtle challenge there in how to turn stuff that has been used before into good quality raw materials. And I think this is going to be the most fascinating area for innovation. You know, to what extent does it come with the citizen or the consumer themselves playing their part? To what extent does it come through technology? To what extent does it come from favouring certain materials and perhaps, you know, taking others out of the system altogether? I think this is a huge question mark for me at the moment, how we make this work in the best way. But these industries must be at the forefront of driving that. But at the end of the day, for me, they end up as manufacturing businesses with customers and suppliers like any other.
Okay. Next, come on. John Quinn. We don't get the opportunity to question Mr. Lockhead very often directly, so please take the opportunity.
John Quinn, President of CIWM and Chief Executive of ARC21 in Northern Ireland. First of all, can I just congratulate the Minister on some really brave and courageous initiatives. I think some of them are not before time, particularly the brokerage innovation. I think that's absolutely brilliant, and it's something that local government has been speaking about for some time, albeit I can see some legacy issues with existing commitments, contractual commitments, and I'm sure that will be worked through. But one of the interesting things the Minister said is about direct access with Europe, and it gels with me from a Northern Ireland perspective in that we, without being too critical, we seem to be at the end of the influence chain in respect to Europe. because there's the middleman in DEFRA. I'm just wondering how you see that actually working in your administration and how it might be able to cascade to other devolved administrations.
Thank you.
Well, you should ask me that question 6 weeks ago. But in the current context and circumstances, clearly there is an anomaly within EU decision-making where devolved parliaments have primary legislative powers, clearly in devolved areas, which are often legislated for at European level where there's no role for the devolved parliaments. So the whole concept of Europe is that countries have to implement European regulations in the national parliaments, but some national parliaments are not at member state level and they don't have influence over the regulations they have to implement at national level, if that makes sense. So even though you give primary legislating power to the Scottish Parliament does not have a role in Europe to influence the legislation they have to implement. Whereas that's the way it's supposed to work in Europe. So Europe does not take into account sub-state legislative bodies. So clearly the way around that is 2 or 3 ways. One is you have to build up a relationship to directly influence the decision makers within Europe. So the Scottish Government's got quite a good relationship with the relevant commissioners that we deal with most often. So that would be, farming, fishing, more and more environment to do with this debate, energy, etc. So we have to build up special relationships with those commissioners, and they are accessible, so they're open to that. And quite often they find the Scottish Government more constructive and helpful than perhaps the Member State Government, so that gives us an advantage. And clearly, as part of the current constitutional debate, to get to perhaps the nub of your question, is we're saying that we need an enhanced role within the EU, and that means there has to be some guaranteed access. Everything at the moment relies on goodwill, and there has to be some sort of process that allows that to happen, not just goodwill. At the moment it's all goodwill. Are you allowed into a meeting? Depends on the DEFRA Secretary of State, whether he or she's in a good mood. You get into the meeting. Can the Commissioner see you? Well, it depends whether the Commissioner is a fan of Scotland or is available that day. They don't have to see you because you're not a member state. If you're a member state, they have to see you, etc., etc. So it's all goodwill at the moment. And so we need a bit of coming and going from the Commission and Europe, and we need the UK Government through the current Smith Commission and constitutional debate to give an enhanced role to the devolved administrations within a decision-making network. And the final dimension of that is not just in terms of relationship with Europe, but in terms of the UK reaching its UK policy position that it then goes and negotiates. There's no role for Scotland other than informal, goodwill-based approaches. So in fishing, I can be in the room and I lobby the UK Minister to influence the UK position, but then we find perhaps in some areas of the environment or other policy areas with Europe, the UK position is reached and then negotiated, and we're either ignored or not even involved in the first place. So that's got to be formalised as well.
I wish some of us had known that 6 weeks ago too.
Well, we might get another go sometime, so you'll know next time.
Thank you, Linda. Good morning. Ray Georgeson from the Resource Association, and it's a question for Mr. Lockhead. Good morning to you. A few weeks ago at the RWM conference in Birmingham, the big industry event that happens there every year, the DEFRA Minister, Dan Rogerson, was asked what he thought the coalition government's greatest achievement was in resources policy. And after a pregnant pause, he came up with MRF regulations. And so my question for you, and I've no desire at all to jinx you in advance of the reshuffle, but I just wonder if you would like to give us a thought on what you consider the greatest achievement of your government is on resources policy during your tenure.
Okay, pregnant pause. Another pregnant pause. Well, I mean, firstly, I think I'm proud of the achievement. It's a good question, and clearly I'd like to give lots of examples, but the overall achievement, I think, is the zero waste agenda, which I now think is in place in Scotland. The policies there, you know, I clearly, when I was appointed, introduced that, and the whole context of the debate over how we treat our resources and recycling and environment in Scotland has changed with the zero waste policy that's being adopted. So I think that's probably my biggest achievement, just the zero waste policy. There's various achievements within that. You know, I was very pleased that we got the plastic bag charge through, because that affects everyone in Scotland. Everyone's speaking about it, and I'd like to have come up with more examples, and I'm always open to ideas of examples that affect people's lives so they directly engage in those debates. It's always a challenge facing governments and public policy, as everyone uses bags, therefore you can change behaviour by doing a policy with bags. What's the next thing we do? You know, that's the next challenge.
Okay, next question. Another one from the back of the room. And then you. Mark.
Hello, my name's Alistair Newenhouse from Oilmac. We're involved in reuse in the oil industry, reuse of offshore equipment. But I'm actually, my interest at the moment is in the question of the lack of entrepreneurship in Scotland, and whether there's been any investigation as to why that is. Why certain regions have greater hotbeds of people wanting to start businesses, and what's wrong in Scotland that people aren't wanting to start businesses. Is there any initiatives from the government or from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation to promote entrepreneurship in the youth so we can have more in the future?
So this is on the back of Frances Cairncross yesterday morning, saying that she showed a map of the UK and had Scotland at pretty much the bottom of the pile in terms of entrepreneurship, and that we had a significant problem with the 18 to 24-year-olds in terms of getting them off their iPads and getting them out there.
Well, Ian, what's your answer to that one?
I was already going to look the other way.
Well, it's a very good debate, and it's a long-standing debate in Scotland, which of course is against a backdrop of irony because of where Scotland comes from in terms of our industrial past. And Scotland was built in a very successful country in global terms, you know, a century ago, on the back of entrepreneurialism from many Scots. And of course, many Scots have gone overseas to be very, very successful. So there is an irony of what happened in the 20th century that did, you know, undermine entrepreneurialism. However, there's a lot of good things now happening in schools in Scotland and across various sectors to promote it. So I hope, you know, we can improve that. I'm also responsible for food and drink policy, and whether it's in this sector or that sector, there are a lot of new businesses started up that are becoming very, very successful and tapping into exports. So we have to, I guess, look at the big picture, which is don't be afraid to fail and don't stigmatise people that fail, because in other countries it's easier to fail and have another go at something else. So it's that sort of big cultural issue. And then the sort of more pertinent issue is the big opportunities that Scotland has at the moment, whether it's a circular economy, whether it's renewable energy, or whether it's in life sciences, or whether it's in food and drink, or, you know, oil and gas as well, clearly, which there's lots of entrepreneurs in the northeast of Scotland in particular that I know who have been very entrepreneurial and made a lot of money through the opportunities. So there's lots of opportunities to hopefully change our culture and become a lot more entrepreneurial.
Thank you very much. We've got one over here.
Thank you. It's Roland Arneson here from Ricardo AA, where I'm a circular economy consultant. My question is, if we look at the current linear economy, I guess we're in, we see resources flow internationally. Supply chains provide resources to the Scottish economy from all around the world, and resources flow from Scotland to places all the way around the world. When we hear talk of our circular economy ambitions, for obvious reasons, we largely focus on the benefits to Scotland in this case. Are we missing a trick here? Is the circular economy ambition limited to what goes on just in one country, or should we be looking at an international circular economy?
Well, I'm sure there's other views on the table, but just very briefly, I would just say that clearly the answer, to be boring, is both, in that there's opportunities for Scotland from the circular economy, but clearly, because I think of some of Sandy's presentation, you know, in the globalised economy we have, a lot of the actions will have to be taken at European or beyond level. So, you know, if the plastics we're using coming into our economy are coming from, you know, 1,000 miles away, then clearly we need action across the whole of Europe and beyond to deal with these sort of issues. So I think you've got to have a circular economy of many circles. There'll be things happening within Scotland. There may be things happening within certain parts of Scotland, like the northeast of Scotland with the oil industry, but there may be European circular economy dimension and global. But, you know,
I'd agree with all of that.
You're a consultant, you should be telling us the answer to this.
I think the answer is it is happening globally. Certainly across Europe. I was in Copenhagen last week talking about the same plastic packaging project there, and Copenhagen have jumped into that with us. In fact, the Danish Prime Minister was talking about it. You know, so around Europe, we're seeing a very high level of engagement, increasingly globally. I have a call this evening with one of the major cities in America. I'm not allowed to say which one, but you generally name it twice, and they are interested in being part of the project as well. So we're seeing you might say the developed world piling into this. Equally, there is a huge kind of leapfrog opportunity in developing countries. So places, if you go right to the other end of the scale, who have very little infrastructure, and most waste doesn't even go to a landfill site, there's nothing that well organised, it's just litter. There's marvellous opportunities here for countries to jump ahead, and because they don't have the incumbent infrastructure that we do. So we are very much working on a global basis. We started from a European origins just by the happenstance of, you know, who set the organisation up, but we are pushing out as much as we can, and it's fascinating to see the opportunities. And you know, I mentioned the figures before for PET. The interesting thing with the recovery of PET, it's highest in a few very developed countries with very developed systems as we would have in Europe. It's also very high in some developing countries because they have really simple financial incentives for people to pick up bottles and return them. You know, so let's not get the idea that we have the monopoly of ideas here. Some of the really simple ideas are very good. So it needs to be a global thing. And remember, as an opportunity for Scotland, not only are you part of these various global supply chains, but this is also a market for ideas. You know, if the Remanufacturing Institute does a great job, the ideas that it generates will not just be ideas for Scotland, other people will be listening as well. So there's a wonderful opportunity for Scotland, both as a business opportunity and as a reputational opportunity as well.
Do you have anything to say on that? So we'll take one more question from the floor before we break. Over here.
Hi, sorry it took a while for the mic to get to me. I'm Eric Bridgewater, another consultant from Resource Futures, and it's so refreshing coming from England, you know, to be in the Scottish scene, to be involved in the Scottish scene. My question is really about the tension between kind of the economic squeeze in the current climate and the circular economy. And again, it's refreshing to see an acknowledgement both of some of the real kind of nuts and boltsy things we can do with the circular economy, and also how we're going to get to deal with the real sort of difficult systemic issues. But I think a lot of us here have a kind of a bit of a wry smile certainly we did when we first heard about the circular economy. We thought, well, we're doing this already. And if you look at the butterfly chart and you look at the organic side of it, in food waste collections, if we could get kind of 80% capture rates of food waste, at the moment, you know, typically it's about 40%. If we could push that up to 80%, then you're really starting to talk about circularity. But that's all about massive behaviour change, and that's all about getting food waste collections rolled out across the whole of Scotland, which of course you're doing. Now, we've done a lot of work with the Clyde Valley authorities in terms of food waste collections, and we're very proud to have had our sort of little small role along that huge chain that's, you know, in that ongoing story. But the thing is that no matter what way you look at it, you're still going to have to pay more than you were before in order to roll out the food waste collections. So I suppose my question is that, Falkirk is a very interesting example where actually reducing residual collection frequency to 3 weekly is seen as a way of I would imagine, to finance things amongst other things, food waste collections. Would you be supportive of a lot of local authorities moving to perhaps 3 or 4 weekly collections? And this is really a question for the Minister.
Your first question was easier, your last one was... Well, in terms of 3 or 4 week collections, that's clearly, up to local authorities of what they think will be acceptable locally, but I think we do expect leadership from local authorities. They take these decisions, not central government in terms of weekly collections or monthly collections. I'm perfectly relaxed about extending the period between collections, and I think the move in the last few years from weekly to fortnightly in some areas has worked perfectly well, and I know other councils have gone beyond that and are thinking going beyond that, and I would publicly support them doing that. It's not my decision, and I wouldn't, each part of the country's got different challenges. It's different, in terms of Sutherland compared to Glasgow in terms of how many you might do every week, so it's up to them to work out what's best, but I would be supportive publicly if it was the right thing to do, and a council felt that was the right thing to do. I wouldn't knock it. I know there are other people that would knock it. As Minister, I wouldn't knock it. So that's all I can say on that subject. On the wider point of the economics, this debate applies across a whole lot of sectors, is that if you buy local food, it'll be more expensive than buying it from the supermarket. So how are you going to support local food? And then some folk have shown actually it's not more expensive to buy local food compared to supermarkets. So sometimes we have to explode some of these myths, and I think it's not helpful to say that it would be more expensive to buy products from a circular economy or whatever than from the linear economy. We need to get a new phrase, by the way, for that. But so I think we have to explode myths and find ways of trying to do it in an affordable way, and not just assume it's going to be more expensive doing it in any one particular way. And also show the long-term costs of not doing it. That's always the key. Some of the stats I see about the projected costs of raw materials in society in the next sort of 20 or 30 years are phenomenal. So we can say to the public, do you realise if we don't do this, it's going to cost this in 20 years, then it'll be a lot more publicly acceptable. So I think we have got a lot of, education to do.
Mm-hmm. I think generally, even yesterday in discussion, communication and putting the right message out and I suppose the truth out to the public that everybody's involved and there are savings for everyone, and that there are reasons personally for everybody to be involved in this is key to making this work. Okay, if we're all done, then I'll bring this session to a close. Thank you very much to all of you, and special thanks to Mr Lockhead and to Sandy Roger as well from Project Mainstream. We're running about 10 minutes late, so if we can be back here at 22, I'm looking at Mark just to see that's okay. Then we have a keynote speech from Professor Richard Harris, and we're looking more at the changing face of manufacturing. We'll see you back in about 15 minutes. Please thank the speakers in the normal way. Thank you.